Hello everyone, I'm Cadet Westphall. Just wanted to give you a brief refresher on how to perform the task of map reading and land navigation. Let's get started. The first task that you should always do when you're about to perform land navigation is plan. Now this is broken down into several sub-steps, but the first thing that I always recommend doing is to orient your map. Being successful in land navigation is about, yes, using the correct principles and the right skills to be able to effectively navigate from point to point, but it's also very much a psychological sort of thing. So I'm going to give you some tips on how I try to set myself up for success and develop some confidence while I'm on the course or navigating, just so I can be a little more successful. So first, we have to consider you're starting at a starting point. Typically, that's something where you're going to be walked and put into place for, or it's going to be something where everyone's starting from the same place. But you can actually use this to your advantage by tricking yourself into saying, this is the first point that I found. This is something that I can go off of and I can use as a success story to tell my brain that, hey, I already got something right. So the first step to actually get to that point would be to orient your map. So this may sound very simple, but it's a good way for you to put yourself into position so you can actually see the lay of the land and translate that graphic representation of the Earth as seen of above, drawn to scale, your map, to what is before you. So to do that, you take your map. This is my very technical, important representation of a map, and you're going to lay it out in front of you and place your compass. This is a compass, right? You're going to place your compass out such that the north arrow and the compass are pointing in the same direction. You may have to rotate the map and the compass any such way until what you are looking at is north and the lay of the land on the map matches that as well. The reason this is going to help you is that it's going to put things into context. When you look at the map and you see those terrain features, those hills, those valleys, you're going to be able to look out where you are and see, okay, over there, I do see that hill. I see it undulating down there from west to east. That gives me an idea that when I go through this valley, it'll keep my hill on my left. I know where I'm going. I have a concept of north so that if I trip and I fall, I get flustered, I can always keep those things in mind. So that is the first step that I always recommend you do. Find where you are on the map, orient the map, take a breath, get a lay of the land. Next, let's go ahead and start talking about some of the terrain features. So, I love those mnemonic devices, so let's get into that. The way I remember this, the 5 major terrain features are hidden valley, ranch, salad, dressing. So, first one, hills is hidden, saddles is salad, valley is valley, ridges is ranch, depression is dressing. So those are the 5 major terrain features. Let's talk about what those look like, both on your topographic map and examples of 3-dimensional space. So a hill is going to be a set of concentric topographic lines, those contour lines, coming up to successively smaller circles, which is the hilltop. Once it gets there, it's the hilltop. So this means that there is an increase of elevation as you go toward the center or the top of the hill, and a downhill as you go from the center outward. So the way that this works is if you imagine this is our 3-dimensional portrait over here. If I were to be in a helicopter with a giant apparatus that had a huge magic marker and I could go around the hill at that same elevation, that this is like 400 feet, and I could just draw a marker right at that line that's going to correspond to this line. And then I tell the pilot, all right, let's drop 100 feet, go down there, draw another line. That's that second line, and we just work our way all the way around the hill. That's how it goes there. So when I'm talking about the differences between those, just imagine you're that helicopter and you're drawing around with a magic marker on these different features of the different types of terrain. All right, next, let's talk about saddle. So it's a very creative name. It's just because it goes right into here, as if this was a saddle sitting on a horse's back. So the way you can tell in a topographic map with the contour lines is that it's going to look like two hills, and then there's going to be a gap, not quite a valley, because it's not going to go down to a really level area or a really low-lying area. It's just going to be two relatively raised points with a somewhat lower area between the span of those two. And then here again, we have the saddle. If you can see my cursor running between, this doesn't go all the way down, so it's not quite a valley. There's an area, almost like a little bit of a table or plateau, between these two hills that makes it a saddle. So in contrast, here we have a valley. You can see that these are all going down to a similar, not necessarily the same, but a similar level of elevation. All these contour lines where the river feature, water feature, whatever the case is here, is running. All of this is generally the same elevation. The way you can really see this is you're going to see a bunch of these features kind of look like they're all coming together, but it's really just going to be the area between several raised terrain features like hills. So this also notes it can be a U or V-shaped contour line. Sometimes these valleys can be very steep. Sometimes they can be more uniform and more shallow. So next we have ridge. So a ridge can just be both a series of hills, and here it kind of denotes a linear feature between the lower part of the hill and the upper part of the hill. So if you look at the contour map, there's a sort of directionality, almost as if these contour lines are pointing here along this ridge. And then that's what this is denoting in the three-dimensional space. But also bear in mind that if this was several hilltops in a row, that can also be called a ridge line. And finally, we have a depression. So a depression is just not how you feel during COVID when you can't see all your friends. It's also a terrain feature. So in three-dimensional space, it's going to look kind of almost like a sinkhole or a crater, but basically it's just where there's a rather sudden and drastic drop-off in the terrain, goes into a lower lying area. So when you look at this in a topographic map, it's going to be very obvious because you're going to see these contour lines, but then you're also going to see all these tick marks riding along the perimeter of it. And they're always going to be pointing toward the area of lower elevation. And we're going to get into a couple of terrain features shortly here after we get into the minor terrain features. You're going to see why that becomes relevant again. So there's also minor terrain features that you can use to help orient and navigate. Those are just simply draw, spur, and cliff. So we should know spur. We're all from San Antonio, but let's talk about draw first. So draw is going to be where things are kind of going up and in toward a higher terrain feature. So this is typically going to be where a water feature is going down and carving into the hillside or mountainside and creating almost like a little valley on the side of a terrain feature. So you'll see this a lot actually at Camp Bullis in particular, and it can help you kind of get an idea of where you are. If you're say navigating alongside of a hill and you see a very large draw, like a big old kind of cut going up and into the mountain or hillside, then it'll kind of help you orient yourself. So spur, very much like the name implies, is just an area that is sticking out like a little spur or spike in the hillside or mountain. Here you can see they're very much linear, making those long kind of spur features going out, radiating in this direction. And you can see where they come out in these very sharp portions of this three-dimensional representation. So often I like to point out you can have draws in between spurs. It's a common relationship that you're going to see between those minor terrain features. And lastly, we have a cliff. So I think a lot of us, grew up watching Wile E. Coyote. I'm a little older than some of you, but I'm pretty sure you guys are familiar. But it's a cliff. It's what the coyote falls off when he's chasing the roadrunner. So it's a steep drop off from a higher point of elevation to a lower point of elevation. How those are going to be represented with contour maps is either you can see how these contoured lines are getting very, very close and touching in this case, and they sometimes will have these tick marks. So the reason that this is not a depression is because it's not closed off. It's just showing you that there's that steep drop off right there. Or those lines can just be directly overlapping and it'll still be considered a cliff. And lastly, we have a cut and a fill. So you may be wondering, why am I learning these supplementary terrain features? Well, I'll tell you, when you have a military map and you see these, they're actually, somewhat rare. I mean, they may only be on roads or on railroads, but they can be very distinguishing features, and there's not going to be too many on the map. So if you see it, there's a good chance you'll be able to use it to your advantage. So a cut, if you can see here on the screen, a cut is when you cut into the hillside or the cliff, the mountain, whatever it is. That's where you're going to have that engineered kind of wall. Like if you've driven along I-35 or I-10, you're cutting through the mountain. It's because they engineered it that way. And then lastly, a fill is where they fill in the earth so they don't have to go up and down with a railroad or a road. It can keep it as level as possible. So you'll typically see these along those thoroughfares, and they are man-made features. Okay, so let's talk about how to actually use your protractor. Here we have a map representing a training area called Tenino. We're going to talk about how to use the grid coordinates to read where you are. So first, let's talk about how to orient your protractor. So just like your map, you can put your protractor upside down, or it can be facing the wrong direction. So the easiest way to make sure you have it facing the right way is to look at the text or numbers on it. It should read like a book. When you read military triangle scale protractor or whatever it says, you shouldn't be looking at it backwards. And then when you lay it down according to the appropriate scale, those triangles should fit perfectly within each of these grid squares. You'd see if I move my protractor here or here, it aligns perfectly within those grid squares. Now, the reason the orientation, all that makes is very important to know is because we are going to read coordinates with our protractor right, then up. Okay, what that means, let's explain now. Let's say we're trying to get the grid coordinates of this little hilltop here, right? So we would take our protractor here, our triangle. We would go to the left-hand side of the grid square we're about to measure on, and we would go just right into that corner. Match that corner up with the bottom left-hand corner of what you're trying to measure within that grid square. And then you're going to slide the protractor right until those lines overlap that feature. So I don't have a good way of representing it in the digital format, but your protractor will have the numbers along the bottom, and the numbers along the bottom will intersect with this line of longitude, this easting line. That number represents your first set of coordinates. So in this case, let's say it's 1, 7, and then let's call it 1, 0, okay? How we got that is because we're going off of this line denoted here or here. So your first reading is 1, 7, and then it's about 1/10 of the way along your protractor square, and again, you will have the actual numbers under here. I'm just using Microsoft Paint because I'm a plebe, and that's how you get that. So our first coordinates are 1, 7, 1, 0. So go ahead and write that down. And then you would get your northing reading, so your reading of latitude. That is going to, again, be determined by this axis. So again, we're going to look at where along this line our feature intersects with the lines. So in this case, it looks like it's about between the 6 and the 7 mark if there was a protractor here. So that would mean our northing would be 0, 3, because it's from here, and then 6, 7, something like that, because it's on our protractor. So just to kind of use this to kind of follow along, I encourage you to get a map, to lay down the appropriate scale size, and just experiment going right and up between different features so you can get an idea of how that is actually going to look when you're moving around. Let's say we're going to here, to here. You can use the same principle and get those coordinates. Last thing to point out that you may have already noticed in the pattern of making these is that grid coordinates correspond to different size features. So if I were to give a grid coordinate of 0, 3, 1, 4, a 4-digit coordinate in this case is only going to give us a square kilometer. What that's saying is we're at the square, the intersection of 0, 3, and 14. Not super helpful. That's all it's showing us right there. It's in that grid square somewhere. But if we narrow that down even further, we can make another square. So like let's say we have a grid coordinate of 0, 4, 5, 0. So that would be about halfway, 0, 4, up that way, 5, 0, and then 1, 5, 5, 0. Somewhere in that region. And then as you get more and more precise, it's just getting down to smaller and smaller pieces. So what you're going to primarily be using for land navigation would probably be at least an 8 or a 10-digit grid. The more precise that you can get, the better. But the tools that you're going to have, if you look at your protractor, it's going to be hard to get those really fine decimal points, and it's going to be even harder to actually navigate with your compass and the tools that you have to be able to really make that super meaningful. So just try to get down to 8-digit grids, and we'll go from there. So we've oriented our map, we've learned how to plot our grids. Now let's talk about how you actually incorporate that into your actual task of map reading and land navigation. So let's say we go ahead and plot our points. I'm just going to draw some arbitrary ones here. Here, 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 there. Okay, so let's say our starting point is here. All right, so your next task is going to be making a route plan. So the reason that it's important to make a route plan is because you are under a time constraint. It is very important that you move as efficiently as possible, but still, maintain your calm, maintain your ability to perform and use your tools and not get flustered. Setting this plan is going to help you prioritize, okay, I can get this plot very easily. This one's next to a major landmark. This one, is going to take a really long time. So I need to prioritize, different sorts of things for each of these. Putting this down onto paper is going to help you prioritize that. So first things first, orient the map, get a lay of the land, plot your points using your protractor, and make sure you know how to convert from grid to magnetic. So the task is much easier for me if I use my notepad to kind of just type out a set of dummy-proof instructions so I can navigate a little more easily. So I always put like my start point will have the grid coordinates. So I'm just going to put in some arbitrary numbers. So don't worry too much about these. They're not actually going to correspond to the map. And then I'll determine which of these points I want to attack first. So in this scenario, it's not really a super big deal. There's not a whole lot of terrain that I would be too concerned with, but this is the process you want to go through. You want to see, are there any major avenues of approach? Are there some that I'm not allowed to cross? Are there certain boundaries that would necessitate maybe I need to go south and then work my way east because I can't go through certain areas? And then you want to say, well, what areas can I use to sort of help me out? So a really good technique for attack points, let me back up a little bit. There's something called attack points that helps you use like major features, major socially constructed or person-made features to help you navigate. So like let's say that we have this railroad, and let's say that this is a road running here. Well, we have a giant intersection here, and then some major man-made structures over here. This would be my easiest point to go for. That is like my confidence builder. That's one where like if I need to get something going, I'll go for that one first. So let's say I would probably go for this point over here first. So I would do that. I would draw a line, not just there. I would actually draw this line all the way through so that when you lay your protractor on top of it, it'll actually intersect the line that the protractor lays on top of. Because if you just draw short lines, you're going to have to kind of guess where it would intersect on the protractor. If you have more questions about this, feel free to let me know in a message or an email on your own time, and I'll be happy to explain it. But it'll make a little more sense once you draw this line, as big as you can afford to on your map, because that'll show you your actual heading. And then you'll record that heading. So we're going from my start point. We're going to label this point number 1 here. So I know that's point number 1. This is what I'm actually doing on my map. So from start point to point 1, I know I'm going to go a heading of, we'll just go ahead and say this is about 110 degrees. And here it's very important you to note that is a grid azimuth. So that means I need to convert that to a magnetic azimuth. So in this case, let's say that the declination diagram is a value of 5 between those two. So again, from grid to magnetic, that means we are doing what? We're subtracting. Very good. I knew you paid attention. So now we're at 105 magnetic. Okay, so we have our direction. Now we need our distance. Sorry, my dog is scratching. You may be able to hear it. I can't tell. So now we need our distance. So on your map, you're also going to have a scale. So an easy way to do this is to get a piece of paper and draw tick marks from your 2 points. So I'm going to lay down a sheet of paper that goes from, make a tick mark or use the edge of the paper here, then make a tick mark where my point is, and then I'm going to lay down that distance that I just determined onto the scale. And in this case, since we're going to be operating in meters, we're going to want to use meters. So you're going to lay down your little tick marks, and you're going to see that it takes up, let's say about this much space, right? So that's going to tell you that is 600 meters in this particular case. So it'll make a little more sense when you have the map in front of you. I know this is very, technically challenging, but you're going to just lay it down on top of the scale, and it's going to tell you how far you have to walk in that direction. So we have that. We're going to have to go 600 meters. Okay. And then I go to point 2. I, again, am going to draw my line. This time from point 1 to point 2. And here again, I'd like to point something out. You notice how this point is really big, and it's kind of hard to determine where the center of it is, especially if you're drawing with the pencil and it's dark, it's night land nav, you're tired. That's why they say bring pencils, mechanical pencils that are a 0.5 millimeter in the thickness of the lead. You want the smallest point you can because that's going to give you the most precise point to navigate to. So we have that next azimuth. Let's say that's about, we'll call that about 150 degrees grid. And we're going to make that go to magnetic, which would be, again, subtracting to magnetic. And we're going to go, let's say that's about 500 meters. Again, we're going to make our tick marks on our sheet of paper, laying it down so that it goes along that way. Let's see if I can draw it real quick. So it's like this, our sheet of paper, and it keeps going along this way, right? Let's see if I can fill this in. It's been a while since I've done this when I was a kid. Okay, no, that doesn't work. All right, but you would make your little tick marks. I just use the beginning. Excuse you, Ollie. That's my dog again. Use the beginning of the tick mark, the paper for the tick mark, and then you make a second tick mark there. And then you would lay this little scrap of paper down onto your scale, and it would tell you how far you have to go. So we'll do that for 500 meters. And then we'll just repeat that until we get all of our points. So let's clear out some of our space here. Again, we would just do our next point, drawing it as far as we can on our paper through there, repeating the step, and going back to the start point, assuming that's where you are actually going to be ending. So I encourage you to pick a first point that's going to be easier for you to get, whether that means it's the closest or it's the most obvious, and also give yourself enough time to work your way all the way back to the start point with plenty of time. So it takes your average walking pace. If you're walking on a perfectly flat surface, if you're walking at a pretty brisk pace, you're going to be able to go about a mile in 15 minutes. So these movements are, typically you're going to be going maybe 4 or 5 kilometers. You're not going to be able to run it like a 5K. It's not going to take you 20, 30 minutes. It's going to take you hours of going through, breaking some brush, getting a little lost, getting a little scared, hoping that Master Sergeant will, come help you out. Guess what? He's not, but that's okay because you're going to do well. You're going to get this. Just give yourself the time, take a breath, stay calm, stay collected. Let's talk about a little bit more about selecting your route, keeping those things in mind. All right, let's take a look at this map and some other areas. Let's say I had a point that was in this valley right here. Can you see my cursor? In this valley here. If I can mark it. Okay, anyway, if you were in this valley here, if you're going to for that point, but you're on the other side of it here, you do not want to have to go over that large hill. That's going to make you extremely tired. That's going to be something that's not really going to be worth your while. So if you have other points that are down here on this more forgiving sort of terrain, it would be best to work your way toward that other point that's not going to give you as much resistance and then work your way over there instead of having to cut that corner and go over that mountain. But, you know, like they say all the time, our instructors say, Met TC, if you don't have the time and you really got to get that point, you know, that's your sort of thing that you have to go with. All right, I'm going to talk about one more thing in this little segment, and that's called hand railing. So let's say your point is here, okay, the center of that little dot right there. So instead, let's say that some of these features weren't here, but all you had was like this intersection right here. You know the direction that this intersection runs, north and south. You can shoot an azimuth, from a certain point and measure the distance and say, okay, I need to walk up 400 meters up this point and then turn due east to get to that point, and I'm going to walk another 400 meters. So that becomes relevant. Like if you're trying to, break some brush and go, to some random point. Let's say, what's a good example? All right, let's say after this intersection, you see that this intersection here is close to a point that you have right here. Instead of trying to, just go, let's say if you're coming from over here and trying to just go straight for it, use these roads. They're going to make it easier for and quicker for you to move. And then when you get to this intersection, you're going to be able to look, okay, I know I'm tired, but I'm at this T intersection. I just crossed these trails that went here. I have buildings on my left and my right. I checked the orientation of this particular span of road, and yes, it makes sense because my compass runs, this way. Okay, I know where I'm at. I'm right here. And then you can shoot an azimuth to your point from that intersection, get a reliable distance to travel, and grab that point really quick, get back to your point of departure, and hey, you're right back on a major terrain feature that you can use to navigate to and from. You're going to see these on Camp Bullis. They have fire breaks, they have roads, they have trails, but bear in mind, not all of these are always going to be the same now as when the map is drawn. That's especially true for trails that are very susceptible to weathering and as well man-made features. They don't always stay up. But looking for things like water towers, major intersections, those are the things that are going to stay, and those are the things that you should be using for handrails and attack points. So this was just supposed to be a brief refresher on how to sit down, take your tools, plot your points, get a plan, and put that plan into place. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on the Discord, email, whatever you want. We can go through particular examples. I can give you some practice once we get some hands-on maps, or you can come to one of those sessions. We have a few more days left, but just please let me know how I can help, and I'll be happy to do so. Thanks for listening.